Juniper by Monica Furlong, Chapter 14. Once or twice on my walks with Truan, I had noticed an odd-shaped building near the circle of standing stones, where she often liked to go and sit. It was made of stone with curving walls that bent upward toward the ridge of the roof. The line of the ridge, I had noticed once, pointed to the center of the stone circle. One day, when rain was pelting down, we had pushed open the creaking wooden door and gone inside. It was much bigger than it appeared from the outside, with a plain earth floor that looked as if it had been recently raked, and a center hearth with a fire already laid upon it. We could see this only by leaving the door open, since there were no slits or holes in the walls to give light. "Someone uses this place," I remarked to Truan. "But who, and for what?" She made some reply about it being a shepherd's hut, but I knew what they looked like: tiny, rudely constructed wooden buildings, with just room for a man to curl up and sleep out of the wind and rain. Not like this at all. Back at home, I noticed that Angharad was no longer pushing us to continual spinning and weaving. She gave us time to idle the day away as she had never done before. She and Uni were often deep in conversation, not always agreeing, I suspect. The sort of conversation that breaks off as soon as you come into the room. "Something funny's going on," I said to Truan. "It's the ceremony," she replied anxiously. "They are getting us ready for it." One April afternoon they called us in. We had been punting on the lake on a raft we had laboriously nailed together. Truan had pondweed clinging around one leg from pushing the raft out with me on it, and her clothes were wringing wet. I was scarcely looking better. I had torn my smock, and my hair was wild and knotted from blowing in the wind. We were a dreadful sight. "You must both be bathed," Angharad said, and I could see enormous cauldrons of water already steaming on the fire. "Wash every part of yourselves, including your hair." We took turns using the tub and washing each other's backs. I could feel Truan's hands trembling as she said to me in a quiet voice, "It's going to happen." Certainly there did seem to be something odd going on. When we got out of the tub, we were each given a big cloth on which to dry ourselves. There was no sign of clean clothes. "Shall I go up and get a clean smock?" I asked at last. Instead of replying, Angharad simply handed me a huge sheet, and she gave another to Truan. We were combing out our wet hair in front of the fire when I said, "Is supper going to be soon?" "You are fasting," said Uni. "We are all fasting," Angharad amended. Truan and I exchanged nervous glances. "Why?" Truan finally croaked out. Angharad shook her head as if she could not answer, and Uni looked out the door as she had done several times already. It was dark outside, and a wind was blowing, whining ominously around Angharad's house. I wished that if something frightening had to happen to us, it could happen on some other night, or better yet, by day. Truan and I had already speculated on every possibility. Would they beat us or torture us? Make us eat or drink horrible substances? Both of us were sure we had heard stories of such things. We sat by the fire, two substantial ghosts, and after a bit of a full moon, huge and brilliant, appeared in the sky. Uni nodded to Angharad. "Time to go," she said. They stood us up, took the sheets from us, and said, We are going out." "Where are our clothes?" asked Truin, her slim body tense with distress. "No clothes," said Angharad. "You will go just like that." "I can't," Truin wailed. "We might meet someone." "We won't meet anyone," said Uni definitely. "Come along, there is work to be done." Truin threw an agonized glance in my direction, hoping perhaps that I would join her in a rebellion. For some reason I was less fearful than she. I simply followed Angharad and Uni to the door. Once outside, the stones hurt my feet. The wind, which was cold, blew painfully on my bare flesh, and quite soon my teeth were chattering. Even the soft tickle of my loose hair on my bare shoulders felt unfamiliar. What were we doing, and why? The moon, a huge yellow disk at the end of the path we were following, lit the landscape in precise lines without shadow. Truin's trembling naked body in front of me shone in a gold light. Only when we reached the stone hut did I realize that that was where we were heading. It was a relief to march our cold bodies out of the bitter wind, though the only place on which to sit was a cold stone. There was an unlit fire laid on the center hearth and 2 big piles of wood beside it. I looked wistfully at it, my body shaking and shuddering with cold. The 4 of us sat down, and Angharad and Uni lit a rush lamp and began reciting, by heart, a long and very tedious poem. It spoke of dead heroes and heroines, most of whom I had never heard of. It was a recital of the interminable history of the Dorans, whose wisdom had been frequently persecuted. At the end, the words began to be addressed to me and Truin, admonitions that we should be worthy of our high calling, should enter into harmony with the world, should care for others, should never work magic for our own aggrandizement. Then Uni bade us to lie face down full length upon the ground. "Think before you answer these questions," she told us. "Do you wish to be admitted to the Order of Doran?" she wanted to know. Lying shivering on the cold ground, I wished that I were safely home in bed. If this was what being a Doran was all about, it was hard to see why anyone would wish to be one. Yet, when I thought of the hazel tree, of the strange way that Uni and I had come together, and of my experiences at Angharad's house as I wove the cloth for my cloak, I knew that life was pushing me toward the particular sort of wisdom that Uni and Angharad had. I felt that I had no real choice. "I wish to become a Doran," I said through chattering teeth. I waited for Truin to make a similar declaration, but she lay in silence. "Truin?" Angharad asked at last. "I don't know," Truin wailed. "I'm frightened." I could hear Angharad and Uni conferring. "Very well," Angharad said finally. "We will continue with the ritual. At the end of it, Truin, we will ask you the question again. And if then you answer no, you will leave us and never mention to anyone what you have seen here." One of them had touched a light to the fire on the hearth, and I could hear twigs crackling. "You may get up and come to the fire," Uni said to us, and we sat on our haunches beside it. Truin was weeping, whereas I felt a kind of sullen anger. Uni took a handful of herbs from a bowl on the ground and began to chew them. Then she passed the bowl to Angharad, who followed her example. I was surprised to see Uni now piling green wood on the fire, when there was a perfectly good supply of dry wood. Inevitably, The stone hut quickly filled with acrid smoke. My eyes brimmed with tears. I began to cough convulsively, and for a few moments I lost sight of the others in the smoke. Feeling that I was suffocating, I made for the door, but found that I could not open it. To my surprise, it appeared to be bolted from the outside. Groping my way back in the smoke, I bumped into Truan, and we sat with our arms around each other, still shaking with cold, as far from the fire as we could get. Then the smoke cleared a little, and to our astonishment, Angharad and Uni had disappeared. I noticed that the green wood had been placed in a separate pile, and I had no doubt that the two Dorans had deliberately filled the hut with smoke. But there was another huge pile of dry wood next to it, and I put 2 large logs on the fire. Truan crept back to the hearth, still coughing. "Why did they do it?" she asked. "Is it part of the test?" I was so angry at being locked in the hut that I could scarcely speak. "You do suppose they intend to come back?" Truan asked tremulously. "They wouldn't just leave us here." "Of course they'll come back," I said with a confidence that was not entirely real. Suppose the 2 of us were destined to be some sort of sacrifice? Suppose they were going to leave us to starve? I noticed a shabby wooden chest in the far corner of the hut and dragged it closer to the fire. For a while, Truan and I sat on it. It was warmer than the cold stones. Then slid down to the earth floor and sat leaning against each other, propped up by the chest, our feet comfortably toasting by the fire. Its flames now burned in a deep old rose color, shot through at moments with vivid blue. There was a sweet smell so pure and fragrant that for a moment I almost forgot where I was. I closed my eyes to enjoy it, and when I opened them again, everything seemed a little bigger and clearer, as if I could suddenly see better. "Do you see anything?" Truan asked hesitatingly after a while. "Not exactly. Things just look more beautiful. I think the smoke must be magic, and I feel a lot warmer." Even as I spoke, I noticed the grain in the wooden door as the firelight flickered over it. It looked like the markings on a snake's back, and like a snake it moved. I did not feel threatened, simply delighted at the beauty of the design. "The door!" I said to Truan. "Snakes!" she said cheerfully, and I felt full of love for her that she could share this vision with me. I now noticed that the stones on the walls shone with a sort of golden light. The shadows between them were deep and lustrous, and there were faces, not ugly or frightening faces as sometimes in dreams, but very ancient faces, some in profile with hooked noses, some with gentle smiles and closed eyes. Tracing out these faces fascinated me so much that I was silent for a long time. The fire was a continuing source of wonder. Gazing into its shifting and hissing depths, I saw an extraordinary sight. There was a branch with buds of apple blossom on it, probably culled from one of Angharad's old trees. As I watched, the warmth caused the buds to open. For a moment I gazed at the perfect flowers until the flames caught them too, and quickly reduced the whole branch to ashes. I felt that Truan and I were like the buds coming into flower in our youth and beauty, one day achieving our moment of perfection, then returning to the nothingness from which we came. "Are you still frightened?" I asked her. "Oh no, not at all. Well, not of being a Doran." It's what we have to be, isn't it, you and me? It's what we're meant for, don't you think? Warm from the heat of the fire, busy in the caverns and passages of our own minds, Truan and I dozed, propped up against the wooden chest. When I at last awoke, Angharad and Uni were sitting once more on the far side of the fire, looking as if they had never disappeared. They sat still and silent, without a glance in our direction. They were different, however, as everything else was different. Both of them had the same golden glow that I had noticed in the stones. The folds of the yellow shawl that Angharad wore seemed deep with mystery. Even Uni's worn black garments had a luminous sheen to them. Angharad's face, always full of kindness, now seemed so pure, generous, and good that I felt full of reverence as I looked at it. Uni's dark, stern face held the desperate sadness of a lost little girl, yet I could see how gradually, painfully, that loneliness had grown into a great strength. Uni, I saw, though I felt I had always known this about her, was totally without fear. Whatever this strange, uncomfortable ceremony was about, I decided that Angharad and Uni were to be